Headliner Nation, we are on to week 2 at the wide receiver position. Some guys with some real surprising performances last week. A few guys that are banged up and a ton of information that we need to talk about today in our start and sit matchup analysis. And week 2 is going to get kicked off on Thursday Night Football with Green Bay and Washington. We have an opportunity to see some big fantasy performances right off the bat. I don't believe that there's any reason to panic on Terry McLaurin as of yet. Now, last week, I don't know if you saw it or not, but the numbers didn't look great, but Jayden Daniels barely missed him on what would have been probably about a 60-yard touchdown pass. Now, this week, I'm not super stoked for his potential either. Green Bay got after Jared Goff last week and made him make some very quick throws. This week could be the same thing with Jayden Daniels, and maybe he's needing to get rid of the ball a little bit quicker to Austin Eckler, Zach Ertz, or even Deebo Samuel. And if that happens, they're not going to have the opportunity to go down the field nearly as much. But we know Terry McLaurin doesn't need a ton of targets to have upside. So even though his upside could be there in a back and forth game this week, I don't know if all the targets will be there. And speaking of Deebo Samuel, he was the wide receiver 5 last week. And this is the type of matchup that he absolutely could take a ton of advantage of. The Green Bay Packers, I think, if anything, we're more confused about the wide receiver usage now at this point. And really the snap percentages really show that confusion on paper, because when you take a look at last week, Romeo Doubs played 71% of the snaps. Okay, Matthew Golden 48%. Wicks 46%, and Reed at 38%. Now, Reed makes sense because he's banged up. He's playing through a fracture right now. And even though he was good last week, he's probably not going to be on the field nearly as much until he's fully healed. And I don't know how much time that's going to take. Matthew Golden is probably the most concerning at this point. With as good as he was in training camp, and for as good as the reports were coming out of training camp, I'm shocked that he wasn't on the field all that more often. Now, maybe that has something to do with Green Bay. They were trying to maybe not throw the ball nearly as much in the second half. Maybe they went with some more tight ends on the field instead. I'm not 100% sure. I'd have to go back and watch all of the film to really get an idea of what they did with their formations in the second half to try and keep the Lions off balance. Moving forward, though, we're going to keep an eye on this. Now, I think it's still going to be tough weekly to try and decide. Doubs, he caught 2 of his 4 targets for 68 yards, but 48 of those were on one play. Reed caught 3 of his 5 targets for 45 yards, but 26 of those came on one play, and that was a touchdown. Then you have Wicks, who caught 2 of 2 targets for 30 yards, and then Matthew Golden, who caught 2 of 2 targets for 16 yards. We'll see how things shake out over the next couple of weeks, but we're definitely going to have to keep an eye on them. But in a matchup going up against Washington where we could see a lot of back and forth, I think 3 of these guys are going to be fringe starts. We just have to try and decide who do we like the most. Brian Thomas Jr. versus Ja'Marr Chase could end up being a ton of fun. So hopefully Jacksonville and Cincinnati both throw the ball better this week than they did last week. But at least we got our answer on Travis Hunter, who played 42 snaps last week and had 8 targets. That is plenty to be fantasy viable. Now, Brian Thomas Jr. played 57 snaps, and I know when you take a look at what he did as his stat line, it wasn't great. He had the rushing touchdown, which saved the day, but he's going to end up being just fine, and hopefully against Cincinnati, he bounces back and has a big week. But for those of you that kind of laughed at us this offseason about saying, well, Dyami Brown is going to be on the field an awful lot, just keep an eye on that because that could end up being an issue for Travis Hunter and his upside. He played 47 snaps compared to Travis Hunter's 42. So there is still going to be a possibility that Dyami Brown kind of gets in the way of Brian Thomas Jr. and Travis Hunter, but both of these guys in this type of a matchup, we can play them. Week 1 was bad for Cincinnati. I get it, but we're not sitting Ja'Marr Chase. This is the type of matchup that we absolutely want to take advantage of, and where Joe Burrow tries to get Ja'Marr Chase going a little bit. T. Higgins, maybe not wide receiver 1 material this week, but he's got touchdown potential and could still be a solid wide receiver too. The New York Giants are the same offense to start 2025 that they were in 2024. Malik Nabers is going to get a ton of targets, and maybe you feel underwhelmed by his fantasy performance, but getting 12 targets and catching 5 of those for 71 yards is encouraging. Could it be better? Absolutely. Give me 12 targets a week, though, for this guy. And Wan'Dale Robinson, he's exactly the same, too. 8 targets, which is great. 6 receptions, which is great. only 55 yards. So one more reception than Malik Nabers and quite a few receiving yards left. I mean, that's what Wan'Dale Robinson is, right? He's going to be a guy that's going to work in the short, intermediate part of the field. Once he catches the ball, that's going to be about it. He's not making a whole lot happen after that. But both of these guys are startable right now. Going up against Dallas this week, might need to get rid of the ball quickly. Could still see around 8 targets for Wan'Dale Robinson. Hopefully Malik Nabers on the outside sees a few big plays, and hopefully this offense can get going a little bit and make fantasy owners a little bit more excited to put these guys in their lineup. I know CeeDee Lamb had a couple of drops last week, and that might have cost some fantasy owners and his team, but I think we need to appreciate the fact that some of the balls that CeeDee Lamb drops, other wide receivers don't even get to. Based on his volume alone, he's still a top 5 wide receiver, and he could absolutely eat this week against the New York Giants. I'm a little discouraged by George Pickens last week. Not enough to be upset or worried about his future, but definitely enough that I hope things get better for him. Only 4 targets in week 1 in a matchup where they needed to throw the ball a little bit more. I would have liked to see more like 7 or 8 targets, and maybe we get to that at some point in time, and I'm not ruling that out. But we're definitely going to need more than 4 targets. Going up against the New York Giants, George Pickens, if he only gets 4 targets, we need a couple of really big plays, which he could absolutely pull off. So he's a fringe start for me this week. I really hope my Chicago Bears fans have gotten over that loss from this past week, but JJ McCarthy's that dude, and I hate to tell you, but if you were tweeting about him through the first 3 quarters, I hope those words tasted really good at the end of the game. But neither here nor there. We're talking about the Bears wide receivers right now. Rome Odunze led the way last week with 9 targets. DJ Moore only had 5. Rome Odunze also scored a touchdown. He has that potential. We talked about it in the offseason. This was a guy that I was wanting to draft all over the place. I'm glad he's off to a solid start. We'll see how that continues going up against the Detroit Lions. Ben Johnson is going to want to throw a little wrinkle in there. He's going to want to make Detroit look silly, especially since he's coming back to Detroit in this game, and I definitely think it's going to be a fun one to watch. Hopefully Caleb Williams is a little bit more consistent than he was last week. He's going to make some big plays, and Detroit got beat down the field quite a few times last week, so it could end up happening once again. DJ Moore, Rome Odunze will both be starts in this game. If you watch his channel over the offseason, then you shouldn't be shocked by the slow start from the Detroit Lions. I warned everybody. They'll be fine for the entire season, but to begin the year, they could get off to a slow start. If they are still playing like this in week 4, we have a lot of legitimate concerns, but I think they will be fine by week 4 and things will get moving in the right direction. Both Amon-Ra St. Brown and Jameson Williams played 90% of the snaps last week, and you can probably account for both of those guys being on the field that much moving forward. They'll end up being just fine. Remember last year when everyone freaked out about Amon-Ra St. Brown because Jameson Williams had a huge week 1? He ended up being fine the rest of the way. Jameson Williams, I don't really know if we're going to hit that floor anytime soon. He's going to have the upside every single week. And the Bears are going to cause some pressure on Jared Goff, which is what we saw last week from Green Bay. So we might be in a situation where Goff is getting the ball out a little bit quicker again this week, and that ends up happening, then yeah, obviously Amon-Ra St. Brown, Sam Laporta, Jahmyr Gibbs will be the guys. But as soon as that interior offensive line really starts to gel a little bit more and they start working together better, we'll see Jameson Williams take off. Really solid target percentage for both Rams wide receivers last week. Puka Nacua obviously made a little bit more of his 11 targets, but Davante Adams wasn't bad at 8 targets. Moving forward, I think it's really going to be kind of the same thing. Puka will lead the way. He will have the most upside. He's going to be a must-start every single week as long as Matthew Stafford stays healthy. Puka had a little bit of a scare last week. He's going to end up being fine. He'll be on the field for week 2. For Davante Adams, he's going to have maybe a little bit of a decent floor, really right around that fringe wide receiver 3, wide receiver 2 area. I'm not sure if his upside is going to be much more outside of the wide receiver 2 range either, but 8 targets a week is going to be more than enough for him to have startable fantasy potential, and hopefully he finds the end zone every once in a while to go with it. Now, I know things weren't super encouraging with the Tennessee Titans offense last week, but let's look at the bright side. The main thing that we want to take away from this is Calvin Ridley played 91% of the snaps last week and led the team with 8 targets. If he can get that on a weekly basis and Cam Ward continues to grow, Calvin Ridley is going to be a fantasy viable player. Now, Alec Eomanor, if that name doesn't really ring a bell to you, or if this is coming out of nowhere, it shouldn't, because I wrote about him in our draft guide all the way back in January. I talked about him back in January. I talked about him in Discord, and he was in the draft guide as well. He has a lot of really good NFL characteristics. Unfortunately, he played with a Stanford offense that just wasn't NFL potential. So because of that, he was really under the radar in college, but Cam Ward really likes him. He played 79% of the snaps this past week, second on the team with 7 targets. The Denver defense is no joke, and probably part of the reason why Tennessee didn't look that great last week. The secondary for the LA Rams might not be nearly as tough, but the front for the LA Rams is going to cause a lot of problems once again, so week 2, unfortunately, could be inconsistent once again as well. Listen, if the New England Patriots want to keep throwing the ball 40 plus times a game, I'm not going to gripe about it. That's going to make Diggs, Booty, and Douglas all fantasy viable. They threw the ball 40 plus times last week with Drake May. Not something that I expected, but it is what it is. Booty's going to keep eating, I think. Diggs is going to get his. Demario Douglas is going to get looks. If you're looking for the potential in all of these guys, Booty saw 8 targets. Not only did he see 8 targets, but he played 82% of the snaps as well. Diggs, he only played 41% of the snaps, but he saw 7 targets. Now, 41% is going to get higher as soon as he starts to be fully healthy from that knee injury last year. He's not going to come out and play 80% of the snaps right away, but over the next few weeks, we're going to see that snap percentage go a little bit more and a little bit more. It's going to be interesting with Demario Douglas. He caught a touchdown last week, even though he had negative yards, but he still saw 7 targets. 7 targets for Diggs and Demario Douglas, I'll take it. 8 targets for Booty, I'll definitely take it. Going up against Miami this week, if Miami's, can be on their A game, which may be tough right now, we might have to throw the ball at least 30 times again with this team. Yeah, checking my notes real quick, and that is absolutely true. New England allowed 362 receiving yards to the Las Vegas Raiders last week. That's a lot of yards, and their defense just wasn't getting it going. Missing Christian Gonzalez is definitely a big issue, and if Christian Gonzalez misses week 2, Tyreek Hill could be in for a very big week as well. Jalen Waddle is banged up right now, so he's going to be a fringe start for me. If he ends up being healthy and he's good to go, he could end up being a play at the flex position if you're looking for somebody with some decent upside based on how well New England stopped the pass last week. If for some reason Jalen Waddle doesn't go and you find yourself in a bind in a deeper league, Malik Washington could absolutely become a fringe start, especially if Tua is going to have to look for somebody else outside of Tyreek Hill, and Jalen Waddle isn't playing. There is a really good chance that Christian McCaffrey and Ricky Pearsall could split about 30 or 35 targets this week. Who else are they going to throw to? In fact, we don't even know who's going to throw the ball yet at this point because Brock Purdy's hurt, and there's no guarantee he's going to start. So it could end up being Mac Jones that's throwing the ball, which unfortunately probably messes with everyone's upside a little bit. Juwan Jennings is banged up. Sounds like he avoided major injury, but there's no guarantee he's going to play this week. He is a fringe start for me as of right now based on that news. Obviously, if he doesn't play, he's not going to be out there for us. And even if he is healthy and he goes out there and he's just fine, still probably going to be a fringe start for me. San Francisco, they can't find a wide receiver 3 to save their lives right now. Brandon Ayuk isn't back. George Kittle's going to the IR. They're a mess. You might as well just wrap those players in bubbles and hopefully they can play through that. And if not, then at least they'll be healthy on a weekly basis. Ricky Pearsall, for me, maybe doesn't have wide receiver 1 upside with Mac Jones, but he's got a really, really nice wide receiver 2 floor with those type of targets. Really glad to see Chris Olave get off to such a solid start. 13 targets last week. He caught 7 of them for 54 yards. Now, that maybe not means a whole lot to all of you out there, but if you drafted him because I told everybody he was such a great value this year, you're encouraged by that. If you give me 10 to 13 targets a week for Chris Olave, he's going to be in flex consideration every single week. And Spencer Rattler throwing the deep ball on a consistent basis, I don't think is going to be something that we really need to worry about. Chris Olave, Juwan Johnson, Alvin Kamara, all these guys could see a ton of targets right in the intermediate portion of the field. And even though they may not have a ton of upside, they definitely could give us great potential for depth and floor every single week. I mean, Keon Coleman, Khalil Shakir, and Josh Palmer were the definition of balance this week. In snaps, and targets, and production, really the big thing that stood out was Keon Coleman got the touchdown pass. Is that going to happen every single week? Probably not, especially considering the fact that they're going up against the New York Jets this week, and maybe they don't need to throw the football nearly as much as they did while they were trailing Baltimore. That's why all of these guys are listed as a fringe start right now, because I don't think anybody has really separated themselves. If you're going off of week 1 alone and you want to put these guys in order, then it's how you see it on the screen. It's going to be Coleman, Shakir, and Palmer. I think the biggest swap that could happen would be Shakir going to number 1, Coleman going to number 2, and Palmer being at number 3 for basically all season. He's going to be a bigger play guy. He's going to be a guy that's going to show up in some games where they're throwing the ball an awful lot, but your most consistent options will probably be Coleman and then Shakir. Not only did Garrett Wilson see 9 targets last week, but he also had 100% of the snaps. He was on the field the entire game. Josh Reynolds played 97% of the snaps. That's kind of crazy, but Garrett Wilson has solid potential all season with that type of work. If he's going to be seeing 9 targets a week, sign me up. If he's going to be on the field 100% of the time, sign me up. Now, we want to see a little bit more upside. We want to see some touchdowns. We want to see some bigger plays. And those things could end up coming, especially in a game where they might be trailing against Buffalo. JSN basically mushroom stamped not only the opposing team, but his own team last week. 13 targets, 9 receptions, and 124 receiving yards. The rest of his teammates that saw a target, which was 4, combined for 9 targets. So JSN is out targeting the rest of his team combined at this point. Throw him in your lineup every single week. This week going up against Pittsburgh, maybe Sam Darnold needs to get rid of the ball a little bit quicker. If he does, JSN will be the guy once again. 2 weeks, 2 revenge games for the Pittsburgh Steelers. Last week was Aaron Rodgers against the New York Jets. This week is DK Metcalf against the Seattle Seahawks. And over on Underdog right now, I don't really care what pick'em you're looking at. I'm willing to go over on basically all of them because Aaron Rodgers got his last week. Do not be shocked if Aaron Rodgers doesn't help DK Metcalf get his this week. Super interested in DK Metcalf being a high upside option going up against Seattle. And they've got some very good cornerbacks, but he's going to be fed this week. And Seattle just allowed over 100 receiving yards to Ricky Pearsall. Now, DK Metcalf isn't in the same role as Ricky Pearsall and may not see the exact amount of yards. I still like what I'm seeing over on Underdog. If you want to go with the touchdown, you can go with the touchdown. If you think he's going to go higher than 64.5 receiving yards, go higher than 64.5 receiving yards. I think he definitely has a shot going higher than 12.55 fantasy points. But you can't play any of those pick'ems if you don't get signed up over on Underdog. And if you head over to their app right now, download it to your phone, create a new account using code Headliners and make a deposit of at least $10. As soon as you do that and enter your first contest, you're going to get a super special pick'em that's almost guaranteed to hit. You can play it along with any of the other pick'ems that we talk about throughout the week, and you're going to get a deposit bonus as well. So head on over to Underdog and play along with us all season long. It is a great platform and we have been killing it over there. Jake hit a ton of his picks last week and will continue to do so moving forward. And for those of you wondering about Calvin Austin, I think he's a fringe start right now. Clearly, Aaron Rodgers is probably going to be looking his way a decent amount. And because he fits that Ricky Pearsall role a little bit better than what DK Metcalf does, I wouldn't be shocked if he doesn't see some of the same floor, at least, that Ricky Pearsall did last week against these same Seahawks. Jerry Jeudy and Cedric Tillman both had solid weeks last week. They both saw 8 targets. Tillman came away with a touchdown, and this week going up against a Baltimore secondary that got roasted by Buffalo wide receivers last week, they both got really solid potential once again. Tillman's got that big playability. We could definitely see some deep touchdowns for him as the season goes on. Love seeing a touchdown in week 1. Jerry Jeudy's probably going to be the guy that gets the same amount of volume every single week, is maybe a little bit more consistent. That's why he's going to be a start, while Tillman will be a fringe start. 9 targets last week for Zay Flowers. He's clearly the number 1 wide receiver, and even though he's got Hopkins and Bateman there, hopefully that volume keeps up. It didn't last year, and that was one of the main concerns. Zay Flowers over the first few weeks of the 2024 season was definitely a wide receiver 1 based on volume alone. He had the target share percentage of a wide receiver 1, and then it slowly started to go down and down and down as the season wore on. DeAndre Hopkins looks like he has a little bit of juice left, and you still have Rashad Bateman, Mark Andrews, who only got 1 target last week. If he gets worked into the passing game a little bit more, who ends up getting those targets? So Zay Flowers is still going to be a start for me. I think DeAndre Hopkins in this game can be a part of the equation. But the question is how good is Cleveland's defense? Because they shut down Cincinnati last week. Is that because Cincinnati just is getting off to a slow start? Or is that because this is how good Cleveland's defense will be all year long? Courtland Sutton already off to a fantastic start. Caught 6 of his 9 targets for 61 yards and a touchdown last week. We haven't seen a whole lot from the wide receiver 2s as of yet. Marvin Mims and Troy Franklin both have potential. Bo Nix didn't play that great last week, and that could be one of the reasons why the secondary wide receivers didn't really get a whole lot of looks. But Evan Ingram being out potentially for an extended period is going to give them an opportunity. Courtland Sutton will still be a start this week. You can deploy him in your lineups as needed with no problems. Keep an eye on Franklin and Mims and see if either of these guys really start to come into their own with Evan Ingram being out. Indianapolis looked good in week 1, but they're going to get a much tougher defense here in week 2. Michael Pittman and Josh Downs are going to be the main targets still potentially in this offense. Downs didn't really get any looks last week, and if that continues over the next couple of weeks, then he may not have any fantasy value. Michael Pittman had 8 targets last week, and he had a touchdown with 6 receptions. That's great for his value moving forward. But who is Patrick Surtain going to go against this week? Is it going to be Michael Pittman? If it is, we might not see what we did last week, and it could end up going to somebody else, like Josh Downs. Maybe Alec Pierce sees Patrick Surtain, and Pittman has no issues whatsoever. If Surtain's on Pittman, maybe Alec Pierce sees a few deep plays. So things are a little bit more all over the place with Indianapolis this week, and in this matchup, which is going to be way more difficult, I do want to be a little bit more cautious. Some good, some bad, possibly a whole lot of ugly when it comes to the Carolina Panthers last week. Now, the good news, Ted McMillan saw 9 targets. That led the team. Xavier Legette was right behind him with 7, Hunter Renfrow with 6. But the bad and possibly even ugly here is Bryce Young only averaged 4.4 yards per completion, and he went 18 of 35 with his passing attempts. That's not good. The volume is enough to make Ted McMillan a decent floor wide receiver 2 every single week, but that play from Bryce Young is bad enough to really kill his ceiling as well. I am very interested in seeing whether or not the Carolina defense we saw last week is the actual Carolina defense, because last week they held Brian Thomas Jr. to 1 catch for 11 yards on 7 receptions. Heck, they allowed 6 receptions to Travis Hunter, but he only had 33 receiving yards. Marvin Harrison Jr. is a fringe start for me because of that. Also add in the fact that he only saw 6 targets last week. Trey McBride is still the number 1 option, and Trey McBride could absolutely carve up Carolina this week. There is a little bit of concern about him reaching any type of a viable ceiling, so he's a fringe start, because I still think with 6 targets, he could get himself enough workload to be wide receiver 2, low end, high end wide receiver 3, so fantasy viable. But man, if this Carolina defense is what we saw last week, it could be a rough week. I have a feeling that fantasy owners for A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith are going to be pretty happy at the end of the week. A Super Bowl rematch, I'm sure Philadelphia is definitely going to want to win this one on the road. They're both coming off of pretty bad games, so I think Jalen Hurts is going to want to get both of these guys going. And by the way, Kansas City gave up 318 receiving yards and 3 touchdowns to the LA Chargers wide receivers last week. A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith are in a really good position for week 2. Marquise Brown had 16 targets last week. He caught 10 of them for 99 yards. No Xavier Worthy, no Rashee Rice. means probably a lot of potential for Hollywood Brown. And maybe he's not seeing, 16 targets consistently, but in a game that is not going to be ran away with by the Kansas City Chiefs, and I certainly don't think they're going to run the football a ton either, Hollywood Brown could definitely see double-digit targets once again. Fingers crossed, it sounds like Drake London avoided any type of a major injury and could be back out there for week 2. 15 targets last week led the team, and there was a controversial touchdown that didn't go his way, and if it had, he would have had a huge week. He still has top 5 potential. He's top 10 potential easily every week still right now. Darnell Mooney didn't play last week. He is banged up, and I don't know if he's going to play this week, but we'll have to keep an eye on that. Justin Jefferson got off to a slow start last week, but then JJ came around towards the end of the game, and everything ended up being fine. It doesn't really feel like Adam Thielen or Jalen Naylor are going to be fantasy viable anytime soon. JJ McCarthy only attempted 20 passes last week. Is it going to be 20 every single week? No, I think we could see in between 20 and 30 on a consistent basis. But with the way Jordan Mason ran the football and having Aaron Jones as well, I just don't see them asking JJ to go throw the ball 40 times a game, which is going to limit the potential for all of these guys. So it's Justin Jefferson and then really everybody else. Once Jordan Addison comes back, we'll reevaluate, but right now, we're good with JJ. Monday night matchup, number 1, is going to be Tampa Bay and Houston. Emeka Egbuka, huge day last week. 2 touchdowns. He looked every bit the wide receiver that we heard about leading up into the regular season. And I think Egbuka is going to continue to have a solid floor every single week. Is he going to score 2 touchdowns every single week? No. Is he going to be a wide receiver 1 every single week? No. But in a similar role, Puka Nacua had 130 receiving yards last week against this same Houston defense, so Egbuka could be in for another really big week. And for Mike Evans, we're going to keep our fingers crossed that he can see a big play or two. Houston's rush defense could end up getting into Baker Mayfield quite a bit. We're getting rid of the ball a lot faster. I mean, we're starting Nico Collins. You basically have to. He's a stud. You drafted him either at the end of the first or beginning of the second round. But the way CJ Stroud in this offense looked last week, you're not really excited about this week either. You are keeping your fingers crossed and hoping these guys get back on track. We know Nico Collins has that big playability, and we know that he can explode at any point in time. And for fantasy owners, hopefully it's week 2. The second Monday night game, the late Monday night game, will be the LA Chargers and the Las Vegas Raiders. And I'm a little perplexed about what we're going to do with these wide receivers for the Chargers moving forward. I know Quentin Johnston had 2 touchdowns, and he was a deep sleeper candidate for me this season. So if you think I'm disrespecting him by leaving him as a sit, I'm really not. I just don't think we're going to see that from him every single week. And I think Ladd McConkey and Keenan Allen will be the guys that see a majority of the volume, where Quentin Johnston might be a little bit more touchdown dependent. So we'll have to see how things continue to play out. If you have Quentin Johnston, you probably picked him up off waivers, to be honest. So you're not in a position where you have to start him this week. You can give it another week to see, hey, is he really going to continue to live up to what he did last week? Also with Las Vegas, depending on how the Chargers defense plays, maybe we see a little bit more running the football with Omarion Hampton and Najee Harris. Right now, Las Vegas, Jakobi Meyers is the only guy that I'll rely on that's not named Brock Bowers. And Brock Bowers is banged up, but it sounds like he's going to be just fine, and he's going to end up playing. The Chargers more than likely win this game, and if they do, they're probably going to be leading for a decent amount of it, which means Las Vegas is going to have to throw the football. And based on how much and how well they threw it last week, Jakobi Meyers is definitely in consideration for being in your fantasy roster and in your lineup. Dante Thornton, we're going to keep our fingers crossed that at some point in time, he starts to see some bigger plays. If he does, and if one is potentially this week, he could become a fringe start for us as well. And Trey Tucker, yeah, he scored last week, but I'm not willing to go down that road just yet. Headliner Nation, hopefully this video helped you with all of your questions at the wide receiver position. Now, if you still have questions about specific players, our rankings videos that come out before Thursday Night Football will definitely help you get things set before kickoff. For now, Headliner Nation, I gotta go record quarterback. Stay safe, stay healthy. Hit the subscribe button on the way out. We're almost at 250,000 subscribers. But I'll catch you all in the next episode of the Fantasy Headliners.